The sea is never silent. Even in stillness, waves carry a voice softer than any breath of wind. On a quiet night, when the stars lean close, you can almost hear it calling through the shifting tides. It is not a shout, not a warning, but a whisper, gentle as foam dissolving against the shore. Some say these whispers belong to the ocean itself, a living memory that moves with salt and current. Others believe it is Poseidon, not the god of storms alone, but the keeper of calm between them. In a forgotten village, close to the edge of the endless blue, people live by these unspoken tides. Fishermen wake with the dawn, trusting the sea to guide them home when horizons blur. Children press seashells to their ears, certain that secrets hide in the hollow spirals of sound. Every whisper tells a story, and every story becomes part of the rhythm no map could ever hold. And so begins our tale of a god, a child, and the voice of waters that never truly rest. Lean closer, listen well. The tide is rising, and with it, the whispers begin to speak again. Describe a quiet coastal village where people live in harmony with the sea. Children speak of hearing faint whispers when seashells are held to the ear. Fisherfolk notice strange but gentle currents guiding them safely home. They believe it is Poseidon's unseen hand. Far below the waves, Poseidon is not the fearsome ruler often imagined, but a contemplative guardian, listening to the voices of the ocean. His power is balanced with patience and care. The tides begin carrying soft messages, dreamlike words only a few can hear. They are not commands, but gentle guidance. When to sow, when to sail, when to wait. A child named Lyra hears the whispers more clearly than anyone else. She feels they are calling her to listen more deeply to the sea. Lyra dreamed of the sea, not as water and waves, but as a vast hallway lit by drifting silver lanterns. She stood at the edge of the shore. Yet in her dream, her feet touched glowing stones beneath clear water. The path shimmered faintly, stretching far into the deep, as though the sea itself wanted her to walk. She heard no storm, no crash, only whispers, layered voices, rising and falling like a secret chorus. Each whisper seemed to carry a memory, soft as mist, but heavy with meaning she could not explain. Lyra reached down, brushing her hand across the dream water, and the ripples turned into glowing threads. They wound around her fingers, as if inviting her to follow them deeper into the endless blue corridor. She was not afraid, for the sea felt alive, not wild, but welcoming, like a guardian with patient eyes. When she woke, the sound of the tide echoed the whispers, as though her dream had never truly ended. Daylight poured into her small room, yet the memory of the glowing path burned brighter than the sun. She sat quietly, listening to the distant rush of waves, certain the dream was more than imagination. The villagers always spoke of the ocean as a provider, a force to respect, but never as a storyteller. Lyra wondered if the whispers were not just warnings, but invitations, urging her to hear forgotten truths. That day, while others gathered nets and mended sails, she lingered by the tide pools, waiting for a sign. The water shimmered faintly, and once again she felt the pull of voices hidden inside the moving tide. One whisper grew clear, soft and low, repeating her name as if the sea itself had learned to speak. She pressed her ear close to the water, the salt spray cool on her face, her heart steady but alert. The sound was not frightening, but calming, a rhythm of patience, urging her to stay and listen longer. Every word dissolved before she could grasp it. Yet the meaning sank into her heart like sinking sand. She knew then that the ocean carried memories too vast for language, but not too far for her to feel. That night, she dreamed again. And this time the path led her farther into the glowing, endless corridor. The walls of water held shapes that shimmered, fragments of stories, lives once touched by waves. A sailor smiling as he returned, a shell growing in spirals, coral blossoming like gardens of flame. Each image drifted past her like a lantern, whispering not in words, but in feelings too deep to name. Lyra realized the sea was not silent history, but a living library, waiting for those who dared to listen. In the dream, she reached a door made of light, pulsing like the heartbeat of the tide itself. Her hand stretched out, trembling not with fear but with awe, and the door began to open. Inside, she sensed a presence vast and calm, like the pause between waves, eternal yet tender. Before she could step through, she awoke again, the echo of the door still glowing in her mind. The whispers had grown louder now, blending with her breath as though the tide lived within her chest. She walked to the shore at dawn, the sky painted gold, and the sea seemed to bow in welcome. Though no one else heard it, she knew the ocean was speaking, and she was chosen to hear. The glowing path beneath the waves waited, patient as eternity, whispering to her with every tide. The sea was calm that night, the horizon painted in silver where the moonlight touched the rolling tide. Lyra walked along the shore, her footsteps soft against the damp sand, the whispers calling her once more. The waves moved gently, as though waiting, each crest glowing faintly like lanterns guiding her toward the deep. She felt the air grow still, and the sound of her breath blended with the quiet rhythm of the ocean's song. Then the water stirred, not in fury, but in slow, deliberate motion, as though something vast approached in peace. The surface parted, and from the heart of the tide, a figure rose with grace, crowned in starlit foam. Poseidon stood before her, not with thunder in his eyes, but with calm as deep as the sea itself. His trident shone faintly, not as a weapon, but as a beacon, pulsing with the rhythm of the waves. Lyra did not tremble, for the god's presence was gentle, a silence that felt older than time itself. He looked at her as though she were both child and messenger, small yet chosen to hear what few could. The whispers grew clearer, swirling around them, voices of water, sand, coral, and creatures unseen but near. Poseidon raised his hand, and the tide hushed, the entire sea listening as though awaiting his quiet words. "You hear what others cannot." His voice was steady, layered with the sound of surf and the sigh of wind. The ocean is not only waves and storms, it remembers. It carries every story, every breath it has touched. Lyra nodded, her heart racing yet steady, for she had always known the whispers carried something beyond words. He stepped closer, the water folding around him like a cloak, shimmering with starlight borrowed from the sky. "The path you saw in dreams is real," Poseidon said, a thread of memory woven into the tides themselves. Lyra felt the truth of his words echo within her, as if the waves inside her chest agreed with him. The sea calls to you, not to command, but to share. It offers knowledge, patience, and the rhythm of life. She wanted to ask why her, but the question dissolved when she saw kindness reflected in the god's gaze. Poseidon leaned slightly, his presence vast yet tender, like a mountain bowing to a single flame of light. "You are small, but so is every shell, and still it holds the entire song of the ocean inside it." The whispers rose again, curling around Lyra's ears, weaving into her thoughts like threads of glowing tide. She closed her eyes, letting the sound wash through her, and for a moment she felt the sea within her. Images poured into her mind, not in words, but in currents. Storms that passed, calm waters that healed, journeys begun. When she opened her eyes, Poseidon was still watching, silent, letting the ocean speak where he did not. She whispered softly, "I hear them. The stories, the voices. They live in the water, don't they?" He nodded, his smile faint but true, like sunlight breaking quietly through the weight of gray clouds. "The ocean does not forget," he said. "It asks only that you listen, and that you teach others to listen." Lyra's chest filled with a warmth she could not name, a sense of purpose clearer than any dream before. The god's figure shimmered as the tide began to rise again, folding him gently back into the vast blue. But before he vanished, his voice lingered, softer than the waves, steady as the pull of the moon. "Walk your path, child of whispers. The tide will guide you, and its stories will never leave you." The water closed over him, the sea calm once more. But Lyra knew the meeting was not a dream. She stood beneath the moon, the whispers swirling stronger than ever, and her journey had truly begun. The morning after the encounter, Lyra felt the world had changed, though the village moved as if nothing had. She carried the whispers in her chest, each breath echoing with a rhythm that belonged not to her, but to the tide. The memory of Poseidon's voice lingered, steady and deep, guiding her thoughts like a current shaping the sand. She returned to the shore, where the horizon shimmered with sunlight, and the water bowed like a patient friend. As she walked closer, the tide swelled gently, as if recognizing her, as if it had been waiting all along. When she bent down, the whispers returned, soft but clear, speaking in threads of sound woven from memory. This time, the voices did not tell her of paths or doors, but of listening, of the silence between the waves. She realized the gift Poseidon offered was not sight, not command, but the deeper art of listening with the heart. Lyra closed her eyes, letting the sea's rhythm wash through her, each sound carrying patience older than stone. The tide taught her that listening was not waiting for words, but opening to the quiet meaning beneath sound. She felt the slow pulse of the current, the hush of foam, the pause before each wave folded into the next. Every sound, every silence, was part of a language that did not need letters, only stillness to be understood. When she opened her eyes, the water gleamed, and she knew this was Poseidon's true gift, the gift of listening. She spent hours at the shore, listening to the shifting tide, hearing stories carried in ripples and foam. A shell whispered of its spiral journey, sand grains told of mountains worn down, and seabirds sang of distance. Each sound revealed a hidden thread, and Lyra learned that the sea carried not one story, but countless voices. At first, she feared she could not hold them all, but the tide reminded her, patience is the vessel of memory. That night, as she lay awake, she realized the ocean's whispers were not commands, but offerings of wisdom. They taught her to wait, to feel, to honor silence, and in silence, she found truths she had never known. When dawn returned, she spoke to the sea softly, not with questions, but with gratitude for what it had given. The waves responded with calm, brushing her feet as if to say, "Listening is enough. You are enough." Lyra carried this gift back to the village, though the people could not yet hear the whispers as she did. Still, she shared what she could: when to fish, when to rest, when to watch the sky for signs of change. The villagers noticed her wisdom, and though they did not understand her secret, they trusted her gentle guidance. She never claimed it as her own, always pointing to the sea, saying simply, "The ocean teaches, I only listen." And so the gift of listening spread quietly. not as a command, but as a rhythm people began to follow. Fishermen found safer journeys, children played in calm tides, and the village felt more at peace than before. The gift was not power or prophecy, but harmony, the ability to hear life moving in balance with the sea. One evening, as the sun sank low, Lyra heard Poseidon's voice again, woven into the song of the tide. "You have listened well," he said, his words soft as dusk. "And in listening, you have begun to teach." Lyra bowed her head, the sea's spray cool on her skin, her heart filled with a quiet pride she could not name. The god's voice faded, leaving behind the steady pulse of waves, a reminder that his presence was never gone. She walked home under starlight, carrying not a burden, but a gift, the ocean's whispering tides within her soul. The sea spoke again, not in thunder, not in roar, but in threads of sound, softer than breath and lighter than foam. Lyra sat by the shore, listening as the tide pulled and returned, each wave carrying a story from far away. She heard voices not her own, whispers of lives the sea had touched, carried, and remembered with endless patience. The first story drifted to her through the hush of waves, a sailor long gone yet alive in the ocean's breath. He had once sailed too far, yet the sea cradled him, guiding him gently back to the harbor he called home. The tide did not tell of loss or fear, but of return, of journeys that end where hearts most wish to be. Lyra closed her eyes, and the sailor's joy brushed her thoughts, light as gull wings across the morning sky. Then another whisper came, this one delicate, like the spiral of a shell turning slowly beneath shifting sands. It told of a grain of sand that had waited centuries, carried by waves, pressed into pearl within a clam. The story was not of haste, but of patience, of beauty born through time, of silence shaping something rare. Lyra felt the calm of that truth, the ocean teaching her that waiting was not emptiness, but quiet creation. Next, the tide carried a song, not words, but the hum of coral reefs, breathing beneath warm and starlit water. She saw colors in her mind, red, gold, and blue, weaving gardens that swayed with fish and forgotten songs. The ocean's voice told her reefs were storytellers too, holding the memory of every creature that had lived there. Each stone, each branch of coral, was an archive of time, silent yet bursting with the rhythm of existence. Lyra pressed her hand to the tide, and the whispers grew warmer, flowing through her like rivers of light. The next story was softer still, a single drop of rain falling into the sea, greeted by countless brothers. That drop became part of a current, then part of a wave, then part of a tide that reached every shore. She understood then that nothing was ever lost to the ocean, only transformed, only carried into new forms. The voices continued, weaving threads of memory, each whisper adding to the tapestry the sea unfolded for her. Some were gentle, like the song of a mother rocking her child as boats swayed in calm harbors long ago. Others were ancient, deep rumbles of mountains crumbling into sand, carried grain by grain into the waiting sea. Every sound taught her that the ocean remembered without judgment, holding both storms and calms with equal care. Lyra felt herself becoming part of the rhythm, her breath matching the pulse of waves against the patient shore. She realized Poseidon's gift was not only listening, but carrying the story so others would not forget. The whispers did not ask for praise, only presence, only the promise that someone would hear and hold them. Lyra whispered back, her words trembling but steady, "I hear you. I will remember. Your stories will not fade." The tide responded with a hush, as though nodding, a soft agreement shared between sea and child alike. That evening, she walked home with the weight of stories cradled inside her, a library no book could hold. The villagers saw her calm smile and wondered what she carried, though they never thought to ask the sea. At night, Lyra lay awake, her dreams filled not with paths or doors, but with voices threaded like constellations. Each whisper was a star, and together they painted the sky with tales of water, memory, and endless return. The sea did not shout, it did not command, it simply whispered, and Lyra knew its language by heart. She understood now. The ocean's gift was not prophecy, but remembrance, and remembrance was a form of love. The days passed, and Lyra felt the sea's whispers guiding her, not only at the shore, but within her own heart. Each breath she took carried the rhythm of waves, and each step echoed with the patience of tides, unhurried by time. The villagers noticed her calm, the way storms did not unsettle her, the way silence seemed to steady her spirit. When children quarreled, she listened first, then spoke with words that soothed, as if borrowed from the sea itself. When fishermen feared dark clouds, she watched the waves, reading their whispers, and reassured them with gentle certainty. Her wisdom grew not from command, but from listening, and listening became the bridge between her world and the ocean. One evening, she walked the shoreline as twilight spread its violet light, and she felt Poseidon's presence near. Not in form or shadow, but in a hush that filled the air, steady as the tide's eternal breathing. A voice unfolded, softer than before, yet carrying weight, a question braided into the wind and water. "Lyra," it whispered, "what do you seek in the whispers you carry, and why do you listen so faithfully?" She paused, the sand cool beneath her feet, the waves brushing her ankles as though urging her to answer. Her heart stirred with honesty, and she spoke aloud, her voice blending with the sea's murmur. "I do not listen for power," she said, "nor to command, nor to change the sea into what I wish. I listen because every story matters. Every whisper is a life remembered, and no memory should be left unheard." The tide swelled, a single wave rising higher, then folding back with grace, as if nodding at her truth. Poseidon's voice carried warmth this time, not distance, but closeness, as though speaking to kin rather than mortal. "Few understand," he said, "that the sea does not demand worship, but remembrance, and you have given this gift." Lyra's eyes shimmered with quiet wonder, her heart beating to the rhythm of his words as stars bloomed overhead. The god's voice grew softer, yet each word sank deep, anchoring in her spirit like stones in calm sand. "The whispers you hear will not fade," he told her, "for memory kept in kindness becomes eternal." Lyra bowed her head, not in fear, but in gratitude, her hair catching the salt wind as if it too listened. The tide brushed her toes again, playful and tender, like a friend's touch, like an elder's hand upon her shoulder. She felt no burden, only purpose, a sense that the ocean had entrusted her with something delicate yet vast. The next morning, she shared with the village a story of the raindrop, of how nothing is ever lost. She told them that every life, no matter how small, joined something greater, carried in currents that never end. The people listened, their faces calm, and though they did not hear the whispers themselves, they believed her words. Children began to sit by the shore in silence, waiting, listening, practicing the stillness Lyra gently encouraged. Fishermen moved with more care, noticing the sea as partner, not obstacle, grateful for its guidance and patience. Elders found comfort in her words, sensing their own lives were not vanishing but becoming part of something vast. And so, a change settled upon the village, subtle but steady, like the tide reshaping the shore grain by grain. Lyra realized then that Poseidon's gift was not hers alone, but meant to ripple outward, like waves across water. The sea had whispered, she had listened, and now she became the echo, carrying its song into human hearts. That night, as she lay beneath the stars, she whispered back to the ocean, "I will keep your stories safe." The tide answered not with words, but with a lullaby of waves, a promise that she would never listen alone. The years passed, and Lyra grew into a woman whose presence felt as steady as the tides that shaped her life. The whispers never left her, though they softened, blending into her breath as though they had always belonged there. Children of the village gathered by her side, eager for stories, eager to hear the sea through her gentle voice. She told them of the sailor who found home, the grain of sand that became a pearl, the coral gardens alive with song. She spoke of raindrops joining tides, of memories carried without end, of silence holding truths deeper than words. The children listened wide-eyed, not realizing they too were learning to hear the ocean in their own quiet way. As Lyra aged, she spent more time by the shore, watching the waves bow and rise, old friends greeting her daily. The villagers often saw her standing still, eyes closed, as though speaking to someone only she could hear. But they no longer wondered, for they trusted that her silence carried meaning, and her wisdom carried peace. One evening, as twilight painted the sky gold, Lyra sat where land met sea, her heart calm, her breath steady. The tide whispered a familiar voice, Poseidon's presence woven into the hush of waves and the hush of stars. "You have listened well," he said. "And because you listened, others have learned, and the ocean's memory is safe." Lyra smiled, her soul warmed by the truth that her life had become a bridge between the sea and her people. "Will the whispers fade when I am gone?" she asked softly, though her heart already knew the answer. "They will not," Poseidon replied, "for the sea carries its own voice, and those who listen will always hear." His words lingered like moonlight, gentle and sure, and Lyra felt no fear, only gratitude, only belonging. She pressed her hand to the water one last time that night, and the tide held her touch like a promise. The sea did not mourn, nor did it celebrate. It simply remembered, as it always had, as it always would. When Lyra's time passed, the villagers still gathered by the shore, telling stories she had once told them. They listened to the waves, some claiming they could almost hear her voice woven into the whispers of foam. Children grew into adults, carrying her patience, her calm, her love of silence, and the tide guided them still. The ocean had given a gift, and through Lyra it had spread, not as prophecy, but as a way of living. Generations later, her name was spoken not as legend, but as kin, as one who had listened and taught others to hear. The sea carried her memory like every story it held, not louder than others, not quieter, but in harmony. And so the tides continued, whispering through the years, telling stories to those who paused long enough to listen. Poseidon watched from the depths, not as ruler, but as witness, his presence woven into the rhythm of water. The ocean needed no monuments, no temples, only ears willing to hear, only hearts willing to remember. And every wave that touched the shore carried with it a quiet truth. Nothing is lost, everything is carried forward. Lyra's gift lived on, not in power, not in command, but in listening, in remembrance, in love that did not end. And if you stand by the sea tonight, listening to the hush between waves, you may hear it too. Not a shout, not a command, but a whisper, waiting patiently, reminding you that the tides are always speaking. And in their whispers, the story of Poseidon and the whispering tides will never fade, only flow forever.